Hence why the book's called The Tragedy of the Retarded Genius. Because you can see that this person is struggling to try and function. Sort of sad in a way because he gets so put down because he's not understood and he keeps trying to be understood. But it's also hilarious because the situations like that one, like the time I crossed the border into Syria and got arrested as a Jewish spy. When people read the story, they realize, how did you not know that that was an illegal border crossing? And my brain does not know these things. There's no inner alarm bells that tick off. It's just like, oh, there's a wall and there's a ladder, so naturally they want you to climb it. Turns out that that's not the case. What's the fund for? The fund is to raise enough to advertise the book. So I've been offered a book signing in Hong Kong and I've been offered 2 interviews about the book. But what I want to do is actually do a mass advertising campaign on radio. The other thing I've noticed is these speeches. We had 300 people live watching it at the time. You guys were there. And we also had 12 people live. Well, I love you right back, my dear. I love that you love culture. This is my #1 thing. Before anything is culture, art, history, philosophy. These things are the most beautiful things and we need to protect them. Can't believe like just some stupid autistic guy in Australia has now had nearly 290 people watch the replay. Oh, likewise, I love listening to you guys and your comments. I interact more with you guys than most humans in the history of my life. This is the thing, if you're a free speech liberal and you love culture, then you are going to be against authoritarian Marxists who want to destroy culture. My parents are immigrants and I was an immigrant to the Middle East. I love immigrants and I love immigration. We want to bring in people that love culture. We want to mix our cultures. We want to learn from each other. We have to know whether they love culture as much as we do. My fear is that if we don't do that, then the radical people on the right are just going to ban everyone. And there are so many people who no one has been listening to. So they just voted for them that says ban everybody. And that's natural. It happens in every country. It's nothing new. Someone who is autistic lacks that ability. They don't lack the desire. So when you see them lock themselves away in their rooms, it's not that they want to. It's that they physically are unable to withstand the pressures of social gatherings. They don't know how to even articulate the fact that they desire them. The other thing you'll find about autistic brains is their uneven distribution of IQ. The autistic brain has an uneven distribution of IQ. That means that the autistic brain, if its average IQ is 100, one part of the brain is going to have an average IQ that's really smart, and the other part's going to be a bit dumb. Now, for some reason with me, right, and it's not a good thing, right? It just is what it is. And it is that my average IQ is above average. That's not actually saying anything because a lot of people on this scope have very high IQs as well. It's quite obvious from the way you people articulate points and respond. My brain has the autistic spectrum, so part of my brain is retarded, part of it is genius. And my ability with facial recognition and all of that is actually pretty bad. But the other side of my brain, the short-term working memory, is so high that it's savant. Altogether, my average IQ is still nothing to be amazed about, but it's that section of the brain. So once you get into that section, and that specific part is the ability to retain information after hearing it once. It's called the short-term working memory. So most people, if you give them between 6 and 8 numbers, they'll be able to recite those numbers to you. Sort of like a superhero, but I have a weakness. The superhero section of my brain can do things like learning languages and becoming a native at them only after a few hours, right? That's how I've been able to learn those 7 languages and do the maths degree. And when I was 10 years old, I topped the state in classical piano, but I couldn't read, so I learned it from cassette tape. So all these things are pretty cool, right? But at the same time, my ability to follow a crowd is almost zero. So I'm basically completely retarded if I'm with more than one person. I don't know when and when not to speak, how to position my body in a certain way, how to respond, where to look, how to turn my arm, how to shift my shoes, what type of clothes to wear, how to eat at a dinner table, how to respond in conversations, how long a conversation should last. All of those things, my brain, it's just missing completely. So what's happened, I hypothesize, those facts are facts, whether I like them or not, right? So I'm not saying they're bad in any way. Now, I have an auntie who's actually legally retarded. So she has the same thing that I do. One part of her brain has an IQ of about a 12-year-old, and the other part of her brain has an IQ of someone who's born. So she's been in care since she was about 1 year old. I do have home videos. That's a very good question, Paint Something. It's a very scientific type of question. But yeah, as a kid, you'll notice that my facial expressions were a bit warped. I used to video myself as a teenager quite a fair bit. I suffered from Tourette's a lot as well, and I still do. I've just learned how to hide the Tourette's in front of most people. But if I talk to you for long enough, the Tourette's will come out, but I'll make sure I hang up before that happens. The brain is wonderful. Yeah, it is. It's pretty cool. So my auntie is like, she'll walk like that and she'll be like, "Gubby!" you know, it's sort of a bit freaky in a way, but she knows you, and she knows who's good and who's not. She's a very, what you'd call, pure of heart, which is what I've been called, but it's much more apparent in her. Because if she doesn't like you, she'll look at you and your mother's, it's a swear word, right? Do I have a girlfriend? I do not have a girlfriend. The better I got at socializing, easier it got to attract women. But what happens is, within a couple of dates, they start to see who I really am, and that bothers them to the point where they just sort of don't call back. And that's not their fault. It is very difficult to put up with someone who's autistic, right? Like, I went to a wedding with my ex-girlfriend. First of all, I ate as much as I wanted, and then after that I just did my mathematics. Now, both of those were deemed as weird. I didn't find this out until my ex-girlfriend broke up with me, and she explained to me that what I did at that table was extremely embarrassing and all these things. Now, my brain doesn't see that at all. There was no embarrassment, there was nothing. So in a way, I'm sort of like a robot. I went out with her, but that's not what going out with her means, right? But my autistic brain thought I am out. In other words, I'm not inside, I'm outside. And I'm with her, so I'm out with her, right? But it sounds like, I've noticed that neurotypicals think that I'm being a smarter. I wasn't being a smarter, I'd be out with her. I thought, okay, I'm out with her. But by doing that, of course, you have to be very specific, right? So you have to be out with her, spending time with her directly in one-on-one conversations, not actually being preoccupied with eating or with doing your mathematics. So I've now learned that for the next girlfriend, right? So, but then I'm going to make another mistake with them, and then that'll keep happening. That's life. What can you do? I mean, you're born with a curse. That's also a gift. As I say, my gift is a curse. When people say, I wish I could count cards like you can, well, you know, I say, I wish I could socialize like you can. So it's a team effort, humanity, right? We learn from each other. So as I said, my grandfather, who's autistic, I'm pretty sure he was undiagnosed, but he taught me to count cards when I was 8. You got to find someone who's okay with your mistakes. This is true. Yes, that is part of it. At the same time, yes, that's a relationship. The biggest problem I find with relationships is that neurotypicals forget that I'm autistic, and they forget because of my ability over the years to learn how to appear neurotypical. And so they naturally forget that actually underneath that mask of neurotypicality, about which I did a video on YouTube, have a look, the mask of neurotypicality, have a look at that on my Gap Smacked on YouTube. They forget that I'm autistic and therefore think I should have known better. Should have known better, that's the worst one. You should have known better. I can't see how you could not have known better. In fact, that's actually a massive part of why I'm getting accused of something I didn't do. I went to Lebanon because I love Lebanon. If you go see one of the videos I did, Gab Smacked and the Aulians visit his mother's birthplace or something, you'll see Lebanon. You'll see why I was obsessed with it. I would go and just sit there in the mountains and write, or sit at the monastery, or do laps of the country. It was absolute paradise for me. Be at one with the home of my ancestors, right? To look back and see a house that our ancestors built 500 years ago. 500 years. Can your aunt be reduced and relearn human behavior? No. And it's the same with me. People ask, can't you learn human behavior? Can't you become one of us? No. I can learn to mimic you. So everything you're seeing now is a mimicking, but there's no part of the brain that senses that what I'm doing is right or not. So I have to look back at past experiences in my head as I'm talking to you and mapping on what worked and what didn't. But I don't know why it works. Same with mathematics. We study things called imaginary numbers. It sounds weird that you would study imaginary numbers. So our brains don't know what they are. They're two-dimensional numbers. What does that even mean? But without those numbers, it could not have been possible to develop smartphones. That's a question with which I get asked with a high frequency. Do you get exhausted of thinking? I don't know any other way. My brain doesn't stop doing that all the time. That's what it does all the time. All the time. It constantly analyzes and sees what's going on. It is exhausting, yes, but I'm very fortunate, whereas my brain can handle that for some reason. Right? There's no such time where I sit back and do nothing. Otherwise, I'd start to become suicidal again. It's constantly like running up a hill, and the hill keeps increasing in slope. You have anxiety and mental anxiety. Yeah, well, a lot of people have anxiety, so. How much do you sleep? I was actually part of a sleep study for people with autism. And it turns out that people with autism, if you want, direct message me. I'll send you the results of the sleep study from La Trobe University in Melbourne. Maybe brain and gut. Could be. A lot of people say gut. Actually, my brother's heavily into the diet stuff. The circadian rhythms are actually irregular with people who have autism. So there'll be a day that I sleep 14 hours. But then the other days I'll sleep 2 or 3 hours here, 3 hours there, 5 hours there, 8 hours there, and it's irregular. And that's why it's very difficult to hold down an actual job. Deep sleep. I can get deep sleep. It happens at different times of the day because of the irregularity with which the circadian rhythms fluctuate. So my grandfather has never really been understood. He's been in Australia for 60 years, 70 years, and he's never learnt English. He speaks Syriac, which is that ancient dialect of Jesus of Nazareth, and he also speaks Arabic, but he doesn't speak Lebanese Arabic. He speaks Arabic, which is unintelligible to someone who's grown up to learn Lebanese. Now, I started studying Arabic in 1998 when I was 17, and it took me 3 days to learn the script, and then one weekend to learn the words, and then I got a distinction and beat the class at university, even though I joined it halfway in. One of those things that my brain can do. So I was able to then learn to speak to my grandfather. So I'm one of the few people in my family who can actually speak to him. How many languages can I speak? I can speak English. I can speak Arabic to 90% fluency of English. And I can speak Lebanese, which is very close to Maltese. I can speak French and Italian with about 50% fluency to my English. Greek and Syriac and Spanish to a much lower degree, to sort of, I can go through a shop and ask how much things are and talk to them. For example, you could switch and say, hello, I am from Russia. Right, so you know other people who can do that, and then you use the Russian like, Deshnie Paruski, nima probleme. And then all of a sudden it sounds Russian, or you can switch to Hebrew and go, and all of a sudden it sounds like you're actually Hebrew, or Greek, like whatever. I find that the people who jump onto this Periscope seem to have unique gifts. A lot of them underestimate themselves. You have Armenian friends. I'm not the type who has a lot of friends, but I do know a lot of Armenian people. So I've learned, like, if I stand too close to someone who's on a mobile phone, they'll think that I'm spying on their call. So that's another rule that I've learned as someone who's autistic, right? I have to consciously learn those rules. I will head into the Syriac Orthodox Church. I'll show you guys the church, actually. How would you introduce your book? What would you say about it? My book is called The Tragedy of the Retarded Genius, and it is about someone who was cursed with the gift of undiagnosed autism, who was also a savant. Hey, lives here. Hakol tov, hav. And it is about the tragedies which happened to him, and then he ends up committing suicide. But his father saves his life by finding his body before he bleeds out, and he ends up in a coma. After 2 days, he wakes up and realizes that he's some sort of genius and learns to change the world. He becomes a multimillionaire because of his mathematical brain that he didn't know he had. But autism, no one understands his behavior, and so his business collapses, and that's where the tragedy ends of the book. And part 2 begins there. Part 2 begins when I, in the book, escape Syria. When Syria got taken over by the rebels, I had to break out of Syria and come back to Australia, and then the book ends there. Let me show you the church. As you probably all know, I'm not religious at all, but I know a lot about religious. This is a book you finished writing. Yeah, it was an interview by someone else who wrote the book about me. So there's the book. Oh, I'm going to learn Syriac because it's the only place that teach that language. Syriac is the ancestor of biblical Hebrew and Lebanese, and sort of the uncle of Arabic in a way, but it's much closer to Hebrew than it is to Arabic. If you go to Gabsmack to listen to the live autism speech, I talk a bit about the book. Let me know your thoughts. I might actually read parts of the book that haven't been published, and fingers crossed we can try and get some more into GoFundMe. Who are you really? Well, if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see, because I try to write things on my Facebook page at Gabsmacked when I'm really thinking about what it's like to be me, to be autistic. I don't really notice it until I'm hanging out with a lot of neurotypicals, because I don't feel unnormal. But you notice it when you're with other people, because the majority of people are what I would call weird. Absolute pleasure to see you all. You absolutely raise the serotonin levels in my brain to allow me to get away from depression. Peace out.